Hello, and welcome to The Milk of the Matter. This is a podcast production that's brought to you by the Breastfeeding and Child Nutrition Foundation. I'm Dr. Alison Bernard, and I'm the Executive Director of the organization and the host today. And today we have with us on the couch, we have Mrs. Claire Millington. Mrs. Millington is an educator, and she's done lots of research on maternal and child health here in Barbados. So, Mrs. Millington, it's really good to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
So let's start with the stories around enslaved women. And we know that oftentimes, well, I've read that oftentimes women were not allowed to feed their own children, but they had to feed their master's children. Can you put that into some kind of historical context for us?
Well, that process is called wet nursing. And wet nursing wasn't something that was unique to slave societies. It is as old as biblical times, really. When mothers were unable to feed their children, women died in childbirth and so on, a woman who was lactating, a nursing mother, would be found to feed the baby.
Right.
So that was a custom um, right through history in several societies that a wet nurse would be found when the mother could not feed the baby.
Okay.
Even from ancient times, the practice was prevalent, and there's even historical evidence that in early Greek and Roman societies, particularly with the Greeks, that they would be very particular about who could be wet nurses. Um, they would look for someone who was healthy, someone who had good hygiene, and so on. So it wasn't that any woman that was nursing would automatically be a candidate for being a wet nurse, but they would look at the woman's health as well.
I did some reading, some research on it, and I did come across that. I don't know if it's the 18th century or so, wet nursing became in vogue. And actually, the women of high society decided that they had better things to do. They didn't have time to breastfeed their babies, so they actually would hire a wet nurse.
Yes.
I don't know if you know about that period of time.
Yes, yes. Of course, wet nursing, procuring a wet nurse was very common among the upper classes. I mean, they could pay a nurse to come in, but certainly when we look at British aristocrats and European aristocrats in general, if you take somebody like Queen Victoria, who had several children, wet nurses were procured because, um, it's unseemly for women of high society to be sitting around nursing and whatnot.
Right.
So, not breastfeeding or having the privilege of hiring a midwife was something of status. You could afford to do it.
Right.
Of course, ordinary laboring women didn't have that luxury.
Right, they had to breastfeed their own babies.
Yes.
And then I also read about it became less in vogue maybe a few however many years later, because there was this concern about the aura or whatever of that wet nurse might be transferred to the baby, and so it became less in vogue. So it seems as though breastfeeding has gone through ebbs and flows in terms of whether it's happening or whether it's not happening.
Yes, that's true.
Right, okay. So breastfeeding is natural. We agree, and I think everyone agrees that breastfeeding is natural. All species, all mammals, they will feed their young through their teat.
Yes.
But it seems as though our, higher level beings, us humans, we've decided that, it might not necessarily be the thing that we want to do. How do you see perceptions of breastfeeding has changed over time? Why do you think that they've changed over time?
I think as civilizations change, every aspect of society will change, including natural functions. Breastfeeding is a natural function, but natural functions are sometimes altered because societies become more affluent or they have different values. And that's what's happened to breastfeeding as well. In more primitive societies, breastfeeding is not an option, is something that's natural. But with societal development, people have options. So if options present themselves and it is convenient and it is affordable and it is seen as something as desirable, then any practice would be embraced. So just as that would apply to breastfeeding as well, when suitable alternatives were found and when breastfeeding was seen to be inconvenient for the modern lifestyle for whatever reason, then it wasn't done or was not as popular because alternatives were present.
I just wonder whether or not we should accept that. For example,
Mm-hmm.
what happened over the last couple of years where a formula company that will remain nameless,
Mm-hmm.
they had to, there was a challenge in terms of getting that product from that formula company.
Mm-hmm.
And here in Barbados, we then were at a standstill. And we have a WhatsApp chat. The BCNF has a WhatsApp chat.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the mums were in a tizzy because they could not get this formula that their babies previously were on.
Mm-hmm.
If they had been breastfeeding, there would have been less of a challenge for them. Because breastfeeding, you pull out the breast, you put it in the baby's mouth. It's, no sterilization. It's cheap, on tap. There are a lot of people now that are saying, well, breastfeeding isn't free, that there's a cost, mother's time and energy, etc. But I think that when people talk about those particular things, they're being a little disingenuous. Breastfeeding is hard. It will require time and energy. But I just wonder whether or not we should accept that because we have evolved as a society, that breastfeeding, something that is so natural and still very relevant, as we can see from what happened with that formula company, should we accept that society and evolution is going to make it now obsolete? I don't know that I agree, but what do you think?
I don't think breastfeeding will ever become obsolete, but again, it has to be put into a societal context. Most women of childbearing age are working. A lot of women work. If you're working, well, I mean, you can't breastfeed the baby at work. You can't take the baby with you. You have to take the baby to the nursery or wherever with formula. And if you have to get up to go to work in the, in the morning or whatever, it is just so much more convenient sometimes to just prepare a bottle rather than that can be consumed quickly by baby, rather than sit up and, spend the time. So we have to look up the constraints that women face. And I think we need to be realistic about that. Two, breast is best. And I think that a lot of women would like to be able to have the time to sit and feed their babies, but there's this constraint of maternity leave and so on. So women do what is convenient for them at the end of the day. It's a matter of convenience because formula is not cheap. I mean, I was alarmed at the prices for
$30 to $40 a tin, sometimes more.
How long is that going to last?
Not long, maybe a week, maybe a little bit more than a week.
But people see it within a context of convenience. I remember when I had my first child, I was determined that I was going to use cloth diapers. I don't know why I thought that was a desirable thing. So I even had a friend send in these lovely soft cotton diapers. But I don't know why I thought that was important. But I wouldn't recommend anybody do that now.
Why not?
Because it was hard.
Hard work.
It was
washing
hard,
those diapers.
It was hard work. I mean, I had a washing machine and so on. But who does that anymore?
People still do. No, but people still do.
Yeah.
People, it's certainly in the BCNF WhatsApp group. There's always an intermittent conversation about it because they think about the environment.
Yes.
They want to add less plastic into that that pool.
Yeah.
that we already have of plastics out there in the world. So the
Yes.
cloth diapers make a lot of sense. And there's one thing you said that I wanted to pick up on. You mentioned that the formula, using formula, is convenient. But I think I never used formula. Both my children were breastfed. It was hard. It was hard. But to me, what was even harder was having to wake up in the night and warm water and put on a bottle and fill the bottle with water and then sterilize the bottles or sterilize before it. So I suppose it's your perception.
Yes, your
You know, it's your perception. To me, that was hard work. Literally being able to wake up and just breastfeed my baby was much easier. And I think, to be fair, when you're breastfeeding, it is the first 2 weeks is the worst. And then it takes about 2 months to establish it. And when you get over that hump, that hard, really hard part, then you can see the benefits of having persevered with breastfeeding. But up until that point, you're like, why am I doing this? This is way too hard. So I get what you're saying. It's all about perception and how, and also perhaps education. If you are given enough education antenatally before baby is born, and you already know in your mind what's going to happen, what to expect, then maybe your perceptions change a little bit. And so I agree, we need to do better.
But what about children, mothers that have lactating issues, where the milk is not?
That's where we come in.
Yeah.
That's where we come in. The Breastfeeding and Child Nutrition Foundation, that is literally our raison d'etre. Because less than 5% of mothers worldwide cannot breastfeed. Less than 5% of mothers cannot actually produce milk. Often it is confidence, that the feeling that you can actually do this thing, and then having someone there to support you through it. I've seen hundreds of mothers with breastfeeding issues, or what they perceive as breastfeeding issues, and the vast majority of them I've been able to help. In the end, they then decided if they wanted to do this thing exclusively or not, but they had no challenge with breastfeeding in the end. But again, it comes down to convenience. In the end, some of them decided, I have to go back to work. There's no space for me to put my milk. I'm going to have to mix feed. I'm going to have to do breast and bottle, but not because they couldn't breastfeed. So that's where we are. So the perceptions, you think in your mind is societal, in terms of how perceptions of breastfeeding have changed. Can you tell us a little bit about the average mother in Barbados at the time? Do you think that they wanted to breastfeed? Was it just they expected to be able to breastfeed? What was
at what time? I mean, when I...
So historically, when you go back in time, a couple of 100 years, is it that the majority of women, would you be able to give us some information about whether or not they were able to breastfeed, and what were the challenges that they would have had with breastfeeding?
Infant mortality was extremely high. Because, of course, Barbados was not a homogeneous society. The bulk of the population would have been black enslaved women, and in the post-emancipation period, black laboring women. And laboring women had to labor. And it is really hard sometimes when you think of that period of history that they lived through, where poverty stalked them constantly. And women worked. A lot of women worked. I remember a hawker. She used to sell things around the school, and chatting to her one evening, she was talking about her life, and she said she'd lost children because she had to head cane. Excuse me. She had to head cane. In the old time days, women would, you didn't have,
put it on their head. Okay.
So that was the reality for some women. So having a full-term pregnancy, not having a stillbirth, having your child live to 1 year old, that was not a given. That was not a given. The rates in Barbados for that, the post-emancipation period, was like you could have infant mortality rate of between 300 and 400 children per 1,000 births.
Wow.
Extremely high.
Wow.
right? Because mother's nutrition was poor, women worked, um, and working mothers, poor sanitation, and it was a bad combination.
Mm.
And then when children were weaned, they were weaned on pap.
Right. What can
And
you give us? What is PAP?
pap is cornmeal,
Okay.
or various corns, guinea corn, um, Indian corn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they were fed these starchy paps. If you were a little better off in the later period, goat milk was recommended.
Okay.
Yeah, they would use goat milk for formula. Goats were kept to feed children
Mm-hmm.
because I've forgotten now, but goat milk was deemed as superior to cow's milk,
Really?
more suitable,
Okay.
and it had to be goat from one goat. Sorry, milk from one goat. You know what I mean? You didn't
Or
get
mixed
you
milks
didn't
from different
yes,
goats.
you
Right.
preferably had one goat.
Okay.
So that was what was done. But there were all kinds of hardship issues around
Mm.
infant feeding, in the historical period.
I have to be honest with you. I am gobsmacked because in my mind I have this idea that historically women just bred breastfed, gangbusters, that they literally just, woke up, they breastfed, they had the babies with them and they just breastfed. I forgot that these mothers would probably be working just like our mothers are working now and have similar challenges.
Yes.
To accept that our mothers have formula that they use and they had to use this probably not
Pap.
particularly nutritious,
You know,
probably
if you
very
were
harmful.
desperately poor, some children were fed sweet water.
Right.
Condensed milk was very,
Oof.
very popular
Wow.
because condensed milk doesn't require any,
Yeah, you don't have to
yeah,
preserve it or anything. Yeah.
but condensed milk is also very sugary,
Exceedingly so.
extremely sugary. And that was really a staple. Condensed milk is still very popular.
And
And
still very
children were fed condensed milk.
and actually and Rihanna, our producer, we would have had conversations around historically how sugar back then
Mm-hmm.
was so prevalent
Yes.
and how much of it we ingested and how that has just transmitted through the generations to the amount of sugar we ingest now.
Yes,
We
yes. Sweet
actually
water, a
exactly
drink. You just literally put sugar in
in
water and you
water,
drink that.
but basically I was going to call a brand, but basically that's the sodas that we get right now: sugar and essentially sugar and water.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We were just talking about the fact that I mean, as a society, as a region,
Mm-hmm.
often the products that we get in terms of trade, and we get from manufacturers and producers and distributors, often have higher salt and higher sugar than anywhere else in the world.
Mm, there.
We get pushed a lot of the high sugar, high salt products, and I wonder how much of that is that. Well, that is our taste because it
It's
has.
definitely taste because I find Barbadians tend to sweeten their
Yeah,
drinks. Even these natural juices,
yeah, very
they
sweet.
are so sweet.
Yeah, very
People
sweet.
add a lot of sugar, and I'm thinking, can you taste that this is too sweet?
Probably not.
Mm.
Probably not. We've had conversations from a public health perspective in terms of actual manufacturers dropping the sugar content of their products.
Mm.
And obviously that is a worry for them because then will anyone drink it? But there's a certain amount you can drop by ever
Yes,
so often
yes,
so that you don't
yes,
even notice. So it is
yes. It
possible
is
to do.
possible. It's
It is
possible.
possible to do. There's a lot about commercialization of baby care and a commercialization of things like infant feeding. How do you think that might have changed the practice of breastfeeding?
Commercialization, just as I mentioned with societal change, people are more affluent and they
Mm.
have the choices, and these choices present themselves. In older rural Barbados, you had the goat,
Mm-hmm.
or if you were so inclined, you had the condensed milk. Now you have all these things on the supermarket shelves that are brought in from overseas, and it's the convenience, it's the attractiveness. They're marketed as having vitamins and minerals and things that are for conducive to baby's growth and health and so on. So we see them as good formulas. We see them as something desirable to have. Um, I don't have a problem so much with that because we do know that formula is needed,
It is.
and you get different kinds. Some for lactose intolerant babies based off soy. So there's the convenience of that. But what surprises me is baby food, actual baby food. The Gerber baby, these little jars and so on. And I could never really figure out, I never used them much. I could never figure out why they sold so well. Because here is something you're giving it to baby. You don't know how long it's been on the shelf. When you could just take a banana and crush it, or boil some peas and crush them, or make a little cereal, and so on. But again, it is the marketing. It is the marketing. These things are desirable, and as people become more better off, they see the ability to do these things as a convenience, and as a perk. I don't have to go through the problem of boiling the peas, or taking a pumpkin and boiling it and crushing it. I could just pop a little jar.
Yeah.
But I hope as these things, that's because they're expensive, that these things, people recognize that they don't necessarily, they represent maybe convenience, but not value for money.
Yeah.
They don't represent value for money.
And these products as well, they do, I mean, even the infant foods can be high sugar, high salt as well.
Yes, additives
and exactly, preservatives, exactly. And as you said, when you could literally just, you have a banana laying around, and that's crush it with squirt a little breast milk in it if you want to crush it and give it to baby. But the other thing for me is, I agree with you totally about infant formula and the need for it. I mean, we've talked about infant mortality rates and poor sanitation, poverty, and the fact that babies were dying, mothers were dying historically. And so having formula was, in an emergency setting, if your mother had died, if the baby's mother had died, what else were you going to do? A lot of these mothers could not, as you say, afford a wet nurse. So the infant formula was the thing that they needed to be able to use.
And then when powdered milk came up, Clem.
Yeah,
Clem was very, in the olden
classic
days, Clem was the
still
go-to
still
milk.
there, still there.
Yeah.
So those so for example, at the BCNF, we don't ever chastise mothers for using formula. We do understand, because we are looking at the context, the environment that they're in. If you have short maternity leave, you have no policy in the workplace that allows you to pump your milk off when you get to work so you could maintain your milk supply. You have masses of formula on shelves because there's an international code of marketing breast milk substitutes, but there's no regulation of how these products are distributed and the access that mothers have to it. So they are often not impartially making the decision about how to feed their children. So if you have that environment, it's really hard to come down on a mother and say you should not be using formula. There's a lack of an enabling environment to allow them to just breastfeed and breastfeed exclusively, especially for the first 6 months. So, we accept that formula is something that is needed, because right now it is still considered the normative standard. I remember when we first started the organization, we went on the roads of Barbados and we were just talking to people, what do you think about breast milk and breastfeeding and so on? And one mother said that infant formula was better than breast milk. And I was surprised because, everybody's heard breast is best, but obviously it has been used and overused so much that maybe perhaps people have lost its value. Perhaps it's lost its value.
Because the cans are labeled that they're, they're
high vitamin,
all of this. So someone may figure, well, this must be superior.
A lot of those claims are unsubstantiated. They've made those claims, but there's no evidence anywhere that they actually do what they say they're going to do. I think it's very, you have to be really, really careful with how you look at these products and And also, if you have front of package warning labeling on these products, you'll be able to see what's on them. But often, when mothers are going supermarket shopping and they're looking, hard to make heads or tails of them, to be honest. A lot of the mums I talk to have no clue. They don't even bother to look at them anymore because they just find them extremely confusing.
I remember with my first child in the hospital, a lady came around and she gave me samples
Right.
of,
Mm-hmm.
So that certainly was an encouragement to use a particular formula.
Definitely.
That was done. I don't know if it's still done now,
Well,
if they
it's
still
not
come around and allowed.
it's not supposed to be. But for example, we do have a code. It's called the International Code, or a policy rather, the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. And that really is supposed to regulate exposure that mums get to these products. So they're not allowed to go into hospitals anymore. I don't know if you ever heard of the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative. QEH is a baby friendly hospital, and they're seeking accreditation again, and they'll definitely get it. But it means that there's a policy, and you can't just do whatever you want as it relates to formula. And it's really about helping to manage how mothers are exposed and helping them to be able to make the decision around how they feed their child without being heavily influenced by organizations. We Barbados has voluntary compliance with that policy, which means it's not a law. And the fact is that if it's not a law, it's not going to be as effective. So that's what we're working on as well. Right now, breastfeeding there's still stigma attached to breastfeeding. There's stigma attached to breastfeeding in public. I experienced it in the UK, the United Kingdom, and to a lesser degree here, but instead of anyone saying something to me, because in the UK someone said something to me.
Oh, what did they say?
They said, as I was feeding my child and my breast was not exposed, they said, "Put it away, would you?" Basically telling me to stop feeding my child.
Do you think that it might have been racially motivated as well?
I would say that's very possible. I would say that's very possible. But certainly here, you don't get anyone saying anything to you. Although when I did my master's dissertation, one mum said that a man in a bus told her that she was dirty and she was obscene, basically for feeding her breast in the van. And she totally ignored him because the child was screaming his head off and needed to feed. So she fed her baby, but most of the time it's just side eye. It's just they're looking at you at the side. Not saying anything, but you know that they are showing a lot of contempt for what you're doing. Where do you think that came from? Is there any thing grounded in history that you can think about why that is so stigmatized now?
I don't know. I know certainly in certain cultures, even breasts are exposed and babies are being carried around in the arms and strapped on and so on, and they're breastfeeding at the same time. But again, I would say in Western society, and I think that's why I asked about race, because I think in Western society is seen more as the breast is more sexualized.
Absolutely.
In more, in what should I say, more indigenous cultures.
Yes.
Breasts are exposed.
Functional.
They're functional. So the sexualization of the breast means that it is not something that is it's not to be open. It's a private part.
Right.
And therefore, even as noble a thing as breastfeeding in public is frowned upon because it means exposing the breast. So I think that's where it comes from, because I think that kind of negative perception is associated with Western society. But I think that so that is going to linger. I think that is very much, as we say, modesty is very, very much determined by who's the onlooker.
Right.
There's no need for modesty if eyes are pure. If eyes are impure and whatever, then you're going to have that reaction. But I think with people who have sensible attitudes and they recognize that babies need to be fed by their mothers and babies are not going to wait till they get home to be hungry, you would look happily upon seeing a mother breastfeeding her child. And I notice now that women try to be very discreet with it. They may carry a
Yes.
scarf or
Yes.
whatever, so that you need not see the breast at all.
Yeah. There are some mums that don't care, and they will their child is their priority, and they're just gonna take their breast out and feed their baby. I wonder, because I know that in Western societies in the U.S. and so on, that they've had to create laws around breastfeeding in public, so that mothers are not chastised and not harassed in public. I don't know that we necessarily are there. I don't, as far as I'm aware, maybe you can correct me. I don't think that we have a law against breastfeeding in public. But I think perhaps maybe indecent exposure, perhaps I might be. Because I remember maybe a year or so ago, someone who was coming into Barbados wanted to know, and I couldn't answer the question. I couldn't answer whether we had a law about breastfeeding in public, but I didn't think so because
Yeah,
people do it.
people do it.
People do it,
It's
and
not
no
to
one
say there's a
gets.
problem.
Yeah. So
No,
yeah, we're not there yet. We haven't
no,
gone
we're
to
not. We're
gone to
not
that
there.
stage
Thank
yet.
heavens, we're not there.
So so I watched your lecture series that you gave, and I thought it was excellent. Lots
Thank
of
you.
really really valuable information in there, but something I picked up on, and it's those unmarried mothers, and I wondered whether or not, well, what you were saying in your lecture series was that because mothers were unmarried, that was considered to be the reason why their children were suffering, and they were being blamed because they were unmarried for their children suffering. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I know it's a little bit of a digression, but a little bit more about that. And
Yeah, it's relevant because again, everything takes place in a societal context. Historically, out of this Judeo-Christian culture from which we come, um, unmarried, having a child out of wedlock was seen as a bad thing. And the people frowned on unmarried mothers, and the children that resulted were called bastards. And to be a bastard was a bad thing. Bastardy, you see the historical records, and people are labeled as bastards.
right,
Now we see
in the
this as a,
historical
a
records,
derogative word,
yes,
but they were called bastards. So,
right,
so being a child of unwed parents was seen as a bad thing. You were not. It was a moral failing to have had a child out of wedlock and so on. But we know that in our society, there were more children born out of wedlock than born in wedlock.
and you're talking about the black enslaved
Yes,
population,
yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the bulk of the working class population, and for a long period of Barbadian history, the bulk of the population was the laboring black masses.
Yeah.
So you could have an illegitimacy rate, another term that was used at the time, of as high as 70%
Wow.
year after year.
Yeah.
Most children did not come from. No, it didn't mean that a father was not around.
Right. Okay. Because
It
that
didn't.
in the current
Yes,
context, that's what it kind of
it didn't
means.
mean that the father was not around. It's that the
Right.
parents were not married,
Right.
and therefore, if your parents were not married, your father's name didn't go on your birth certificate.
Right. Okay.
So there were all kinds of there was all kinds of discrimination associated
That's what I
with
want to
that.
hear about.
So because it was associated, therefore, this high illegitimacy rate was associated with the black working class, who were, in a way, blamed for their own poverty, blamed for, it's seen as a moral failure, and they're immoral people.
Right.
And they go and they have all these children from different fathers, and all. Yeah. So it was a form of social discrimination. So arising out of that, of course, is that if you have high infant mortality among the laboring class,
Yeah.
it is because of their social mores,
Right.
their immoral,
They
their,
conflated the two
yes,
things.
that they don't have any fathers and so
Right.
on. So therefore, they can be blamed for their misfortune.
Right.
Their children die, so um, they shouldn't have so many anyway. They can't afford them. The fathers are not around, and so on and so on.
Was there discrimination to the point where they were less likely to be assisted, less likely to be helped by? Because I noted that you mentioned the vestry and that entity that was really tasked with assisting the poor. If you were an unmarried mother, were you less likely to be assisted compared to because if most of them were unmarried, then that meant that you weren't helping any of them, or
Yeah,
is it,
yeah.
you
There
know,
was very little assistance to be had.
right,
Um, it was something called poor relief, which was very reluctantly given.
right,
And if you were that badly off, they would say, "Well, go to the almshouse."
so it didn't matter, married or unmarried, it didn't matter,
It really didn't. It really
right,
didn't matter.
mm.
But the problem with the there was no real welfare system as such.
Right,
You got a little poor relief, but when the society became more conscious of the need to address the problems of high infant mortality and so on, they assisted with infant feeding.
right,
So you had these campaigns to distribute milk,
yes, yes,
right?
yeah,
Condensed milk, powdered milk, and later on they filled in with vitamins,
right, okay,
cod liver oil, that kind of thing.
right,
So they did assist in those ways. So again, even to help them, they're pushing milk.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
in the
artificial milk.
in the
And it
face
wasn't
of
even
poor,
these nice formulas that we have. No, they distributed condensed milk.
right,
And even in terms of, the parliament had to debate the quality of condensed milk that was imported, because this condensed milk went into infant feeding,
right,
and that it had to have a certain fat content,
okay,
because you didn't want to having this formula that was so depleted.
right, okay,
So they wanted a whole milk kind of base condensed milk. So that
right.
was what was
And they
pushed.
were pushing this dried powdered milk in the face of poor sanitation. I think that was the thing that would that, so you're pushing the dry powdered milk, but then you're asking these poor parents to use water to prepare these milks, and obviously help
Yes.
not helping the infant mortality rate at
No,
all. I
not at
can
all,
only
because
imagine.
enteric gastrointestinal
Yes, yes, gastroenteritis.
complaints,
Yeah,
those were very common too. They were
yeah,
part of the reasons for high child deaths.
right. Okay, so a really interesting question for you. How do you think the policies that were in place historically um, that would have been centered around maternal and child health, how do you think that, and how they were administered back then, do you think that they are actually influencing how mothers are treated now? The fact that, when we talk about breastfeeding, most people glaze over. It's not a sexy topic. The fact that getting breastfeeding in the workplace policy, although it is important, it's not something that we have. We can't get longer maternity leave. I know we talk about the government not having enough money, etc. But why is it that we have to kind of push really hard for what is really a mother's reproductive prerogative? Um, do you think that the policies before have influenced where we are right now in terms of those policies that we have now?
Um, frankly, I wouldn't say that Barbados is bad in terms of policy.
Better than some.
Better than a lot of places. I think we're better than the United States, and that we're probably just under maybe the Scandinavian countries that
Mm-hmm.
have such good,
Mm-hmm.
social welfare
Yeah.
networks and so on. Um, but I think because of the post emancipation period was so hard and so rough,
Mm-hmm.
coming up to say the 1930s and so on, that there has been a tremendous transformation in terms of decisions made to reverse the negatives of the past. If we take, for instance, the whole issue of bastarding legitimacy, the state no longer recognizes that, or the church no longer recognizes that. All children are deemed as equal. There's no discrimination against children anymore. And most importantly, Barbados made a deliberate effort to put policies and systems in place to address high infant mortality. Maternal and child care, child health became very important in terms of developmental policy after into the 1950s and 1960s. So we have the establishment of several health centers around the country. We call them polyclinics now.
Yes.
You know, you had organizations such as your own, the Baby League, and so on. So there was sort of like this urgency to address the negative policies of the past, to support mothers, provide them in antenatal clinics, provide nurses, provide trained midwives. So Barbados, because its health history was so bad in terms of maternal child health, addressed those issues head on to become a leader in terms of maternal and child health in Barbados. And so I think that in a way, a lot of the issues of the past have been addressed, where now Barbadian women have access to good health care. You know, they don't have to pay. They can go to polyclinics and be monitored throughout their pregnancies. There is support after care at the same clinics and whatnot. So there's a tremendous amount of support. So I wouldn't say that the past has had a negative legacy. And I think in Barbados, people cherish their children in a way. Sometimes I wonder if it is not a legacy in the past itself, where the generation of my mother's generation, where people could talk about the children that they lost or were still born. So I think there is in Barbados an almost a very I think we treasure children.
What I liked about what you said is that sometimes if you don't know the history, it's hard to kind of understand and appreciate what you have, you know, in the current situation that you have. So you see what I mean? So basically painting that picture for us that actually things were pretty horrid. Pretty horrid. And then Barbados, because of that challenge, Barbados stepped up and they put those policies in place.
It was whatever they had, the feeding, and then when children went to work, they went to school.
Yeah.
There was biscuits and milk.
And school meals.
And then later on, school meals.
Yeah.
And then they had school health, where doctors would come into the schools and examine the children's teeth and eyes and their general health. And then you had these vaccination campaigns.
Yes.
I remember getting polio vaccine, polio thing at school.
Yeah.
So Barbados said, look, we are going to address these issues that affect child health in Barbados. And I think we've built up a relatively good system. I think we have. I mean, within the modern context, because you see, we take for granted a lot of the things that we have. But we must remember that things like holiday with pay and maternity leave are really historically new things that only came, you know, after the development of the welfare state in Britain. And therefore, they became, and because of the workers unions and so on, advocacy for that. But these things in the developing world only became a reality maybe 4 or 5 decades ago. So the quest to even improve that will continue. In, I think, Scandinavian countries, and I think in Canada, you can get as much as 1 year's maternity leave.
Yes, yeah.
So we have 3 months now. So paternity leave became an issue. Now we are moving toward toward a thing where Barbadian men could have paternity leave. So we're always I think
Striving, yeah,
striving
to
to
improve and do
improve
better.
and to do better.
Yeah,
And I don't think that we've done badly.
right. Okay. I love your response. Um, and I think too that it there's always a need to be questful. There's always a need to try and improve things. And I suppose that's why we're sitting here. That's why the
Yes.
Breastfeeding Child Nutrition Foundation exists at all. So yeah, I guess I understand your point, and I think what we probably need to do more often is maybe take a look back
Yes, and to see
to
where we've
see
come from.
where we've come from,
Yes. Yes.
and keep it in
Yes.
perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've done so tremendously well. There is a baby that I know she was born at, I think, 22 weeks or something, and I was and her weight was, I don't even know if she was a pound.
Possibly not.
That is a tremendous achievement.
Absolutely.
Where that little baby was nurtured, and then the mother would pop the milk and she'd be fed and so on, and then she had some issues, but they were able to take her home.
Yeah.
And the monitoring, she's 2 years old now, but the monitoring continues.
Yeah.
And that was done free. They didn't have to pay for that. That is excellent pediatric care.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the monitoring continues, monitoring her developmental milestones to make sure that as a premature baby, how she's keeping up, and then things put in place. If anything is detected, if she's not at the particular mark and so on, the state provides that.
Yeah.
And it's tremendous.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking in the great United States, would she have been able to get that level of care?
Well, even if she could have gotten it, not free.
Not free.
And yeah, that would have potentially put her family in
debt
for
life.
many years.
For many years. Tremendous achievements have been made. So not only in terms of good child care, but even now extended to neonates. I mean, fantastic record, I think. And, I certainly commend that unit and the healthcare system that we have. I think we have a lot to be thankful for.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps what has happened then is that we are in a state of complacency. We have achieved a lot. We do have, in terms of, and certainly regionally, a lot of people would say that Barbados is one of the leaders in terms of healthcare in the region.
Yes.
But perhaps we have reached a level of complacency in terms of maybe pushing forward certain aspects of healthcare. So my question to you then is, what do we need to do if we focus on, if you can take some of the lessons from before historically and put them now and bring them into now, what do we have to do to improve things around child nutrition? And I'll tell you where we are. Less than 20% of our mothers are exclusively breastfeeding. Most mothers will wean babies off the breast by an average of 8 months. This is old data. This is 2012 data. But we don't have any more recent data, unfortunately, for me to cite. A lot of mums are weaning babies onto solid foods, sometimes less than 6 months. 6 months is what is recommended. And I think that has been going on for many, 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 many years. And we have children who are weaning onto solid foods, high salt, high sugar. We have a population of children in this country, 1 in every 3 is overweight or obese. 1 in every 3, which means that they are at risk, high risk for non-communicable diseases. So your heart disease, your hypertension, your diabetes. So what do you think are some of the lessons that we would have picked up from the past that we can use now to kind of push forward the health and nutrition agenda as it relates to our children? What do you think?
Again, societal context. Societal context. I think people take a lot for granted when it comes to feeding and nutrition. I myself, I've struggled, I should say, not suffered, with overweight my whole life practically. And there are a lot of things that I would prefer to to eat. Sometimes you don't know what to eat. I think there's a need for a lot of education.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I feed my baby when I want to wean it? I may go on the internet and read books and so on, and I may want to do the best. But do people have the knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
If I want to pack a child's lunchbox, what is a nicely packed lunchbox?
Look like, yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah.
What does that cost? Because I know of somebody mentioning to me, somebody who was teaching, the disparity in packed lunchbox among children.
Okay.
Some children have the nice yogurt and the fruit and the string cheese and the nice little cereal and so on.
Yes.
And another child may have bread and cheesies and a chubby drink. What does a nicely packed lunchbox cost? We know what it is, a nice string cheese and a yogurt and very nicely, properly packed.
Yeah.
And that is what we would want. What does that cost? What does that cost? So first of all, does the average mother know about a way to pack a healthy lunchbox? I find we're trying to do better now, because I hear on the radio people say, "Oh, your plate should be half vegetables."
Yes.
We
have the school nutrition policy
and the
now.
School nutrition policy.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what is it that we need to be eating? I think the emphasis is too much on prohibition. Do not drink sweet drinks. So what do I drink? You may say water. Who wants to drink water all the time? All right. I may, I noticed that Lloyd's now has a nice these little cold tea bags that you could put into to flavor water. How do you flavor your water so it doesn't become boring?
Yeah.
How do I pack my child's lunch? I want to drink water, how do I provide a water? These things are becoming more popular, and I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
But what does it look, and what does it cost? What does it cost to pack that healthy lunchbox every day, so that the child doesn't go to the canteen and buy fries and fried chicken leg? What do I give them instead that's going to be as filling and as appetizing? I think we needed a demonstration. You know what I would like to see? I would like to see a national nutritional diet. As Barbadians, this is what we're eating on a Sunday. Okay? You can have your peas and rice. Do not fry your chicken. Have your baked chicken. And this is your salad that is going to go with it. And for your afternoon snack, instead of having sweet bread, you can have some other thing done with coconut that's not calorific, that one of our very talented chefs can whip up. That's half the calories.
Yeah.
All right? You can make it with a different flour or whatever. What are you going to have for breakfast? Are you going to have 2 eggs? People may think you can't eat too many eggs.
Yeah.
The taboos about realizing eggs are good.
Yeah.
What is it that I give my child? What is it that I prepare for lunch that is healthy? Tell me. Do you want me to have a meal of squash and boiled fish on a Monday, and sweet potatoes and grilled chicken and what does it cost?
And so you're saying basically that we need to be a bit more explicit.
And you need to cost it also.
So that they know how much it will.
How do I pack? What is a healthy snack for my child?
Yeah.
Because when I go in the supermarket, I still see the parents packing up a trolley with, they may not be corn curls anymore. They might be sweet potato or plantain chips or whatever. But there's still these processed snacks.
Yeah.
I remember when corn curls came up as a child. I'm from that generation where you didn't have all these things.
Yeah.
But my mother baked. She always baked. So you would get some sort of baked good for a snack. I don't know if that was good or not. I don't know. But it certainly was not. It was not this processed thing. So what is it that we eat? What do you eat at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you're hungry? 3 o'clock when you're hungry and it's not time for dinner yet. You're on your way to work, away from work. Do I stop and buy a currant slice or a turnover? That is what Barbadians do because that's what's available. So how are we going to change that? Now, what do you eat instead? Don't tell me eat an apple. So these are some real issues.
Yeah.
If we're talking about nutrition and school nutrition, and what children want to eat. How are we going to feed them?
So basically, what you're saying is take it from up here, the
Take
high
it from,
level
bring it
policy,
down.
and bring it
What
down.
what do I buy?
I think they are trying to do that, though. They
Yeah,
are
I
trying
think
to.
there needs to be more of it, and
Yeah,
costing as well,
yeah,
because people say, oh, it's not expensive to eat well.
mm-hmm.
Not really.
Yeah,
It can be cheap to eat well, but it can become pretty boring. I
yeah,
want to be able to buy the nice almonds and cranberries to make
yeah,
my salad nice,
yeah,
and little walnuts. I want to eat a yogurt. I want
yeah.
to eat.
Those
I don't
things
want to
can be
just eat a
expensive,
banana and orange.
and those things can
I
be,
want to have
yeah,
something that I want instead of having a macaroni pie made with pasta.
yeah,
I want to make it with cauliflower. I
yeah,
can't afford it. I don't even bring it in anymore
yeah.
because cauliflower is so expensive.
They do bring in cauliflower, and it's still expensive.
Extremely expensive.
Yeah,
I would be able to make an imitation cheese of
yeah,
cashew nuts.
yeah,
Who can afford that?
yeah,
So the alternatives are there, but the alternatives must be tasty
yeah.
and they must be affordable. I must be able to make affordable alternative meat, get away from the grease, get away from the calories.
Yeah.
But it has to be affordable and doable.
And there needs to
I
be,
really don't think that enough emphasis is being placed on that. And I think, why are you, I guess you want to protect local farmers and so on.
mm-hmm,
But I think there's a unnecessary amount of taxation.
mm-hmm.
I would gladly snack on almonds or walnuts or pecans. Or
Pistachios would be
why are
lovely
they so
too.
expensive?
Yeah,
Those things are prohibitive. So if you want people to eat well, they have to eat to enjoy the
mm-hmm.
alternatives. But if the alternatives are costly, they're gonna reach for what is cheap and what tastes good and what is comforting to them.
So I want you to also
Mhm.
translate that,
Mhm.
because we were talking about after 6 months when you're weaning onto solid foods. What do we need to do to get more mothers to breastfeed? It might be that they never exclusively breastfeed. We don't know.
Mhm.
But how do we get more mothers to understand that exclusive breastfeeding, one, is important, and do it more, even if they're going to add formula, but do more breastfeeding than they are formula feeding? How do we change that, make that
But there's
cultural
something
shift?
I want to ask in all honesty, and it's
Mhm.
something I asked myself with my second child.
Mhm.
If I didn't breastfeed exclusively,
Mhm.
what harm would be done?
So there's no harm
Mm-hmm.
that would be done, but the benefits are greater than if you
Mm-hmm.
mixed fed.
Right. So the
And
benefits.
also, and this isn't discussed a lot. So
Mhm.
when I said there's no harm, I was being a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
it isn't discussed often because we don't actually want to alienate mothers. We don't want mothers to have more guilt than they already do. Mothers, literally the moment they have a child, the guilt comes weighing itself down on top of us for every reason, for every single thing. So I don't think that anyone, and certainly not the BCNF, doesn't want to add to that burden. But there is harm to formula. There is harm to formula. If you are a formula fed baby, you're more likely to be overweight or obese. You are absolutely, your BMI is higher than a baby who is breastfed. That's why one of the reasons why they had to change the growth charts to WHO charts, which are based on breastfed baby, because breastfed babies, because they realized that babies who were formula fed, they couldn't use those for babies in developing countries who were mostly breastfed, because breastfed babies in those countries would always come up looking as if they're MAGA, as if they were underweight, when actually they're the normative standard, and formula fed babies were the ones that were overweight. So there are harms associated with formula. I mean, apart from the fact that this is something that has to be preserved, if you think about what happens in countries like China and so on, where sometimes they find strange bacteria growing in it, so it's also processed cow's milk. It's designed for cows, so it means that and I say often with the mums that I deal with, they often say my baby is not stooling, very burpy, very gassy. And the only thing that they're doing is that they're formula feeding and they're breastfeeding. And from the time they stop breastfeeding and they add formula, babies are a bit more gassy and so on, which is why the formula companies have responded by saying, okay, this formula is lactose free, this one will work for anti-reflux, this one will work for constipation, because of the complaints of these mothers, because of what they know, the gastrointestinal effects of formula. So it's not as simple as just, well, if you exclusively breastfeed, there are more benefits than if you formula feed. There are, there's loads of them. Higher intelligence, they say. Not that if you are formula fed, you won't be intelligent. I was formula fed, actually. I think I'm pretty intelligent.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the IQ points are higher if you are breastfed, and even more if you're breastfed exclusively for the first 6 months. And then you go on to continue to breastfeed. So, but I think that we're a little bit reticent about coming out and saying that, because we don't want mothers to feel bad about the choices. I don't want my mother to feel bad about the fact that she made, she tried breastfeeding for like 2 or 3 weeks and it was horrible for her and she didn't have support. And so she put me on formula. I don't want her to feel bad about that. I don't think we can do that to mothers.
Yeah.
I think you meet mothers where they are. Whenever I have a consultation, I meet them exactly where they are. And if they're formula feeding, they tell me what they want to do. If they want to get off the formula, I help them do that. If they want to breastfeed more, but they still want to be on formula, then I say, okay, that is a choice. You have the information. I've given it to you. And if this is a choice you make, I'm going to help you do that. Right? I think we just have to show mothers grace.
Yes, that's the
We
important
do have
thing.
to show mothers a lot of grace.
Yes. I think a lot of mothers would like to breastfeed.
Yeah.
But you have to meet them where they are.
Mhm.
It comes easy to some and it's difficult for others.
Absolutely.
But the worst thing you don't want to have a new mother who's stressed out
Exactly.
about this thing not happening, and
Yeah.
so you meet mothers where they are.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to provide the information.
And let them make their choice.
And not just say breastfeed. All right. Why couldn't you not have a little video saying, well, if your baby doesn't latch on, do this, do that, open this part of their mouth, and, so you show them.
Yeah.
Tell them, well, certain things help you to produce milk.
That's a great idea.
Certain things help because, Hobbs or...
Hops? Oh, hops. Oh,
hops.
You mean the in bear?
Yes.
Yes.
Little tips.
Yeah.
Things that would prevent you from producing milk. Provide more information that is useful. Demonstrate. Show them. If your baby isn't latching on, sometimes you have this problem, this is what you can do with your nipples. If your nipples get sore, why isn't this in, you can flash it across, have these little ads like, they're telling you now about nutrition. Flash these ads around.
So, excellent ideas, all stuff that the BCNF would like to do. You are basically saying we have to be a bit more hands-on.
Yes.
Hands-on and provide the information in granular detail. Not assume that these parents know what it is they're supposed to do, and support them while they're doing it, as opposed to just having policies come from down on high and just say, do this, and hope that they will figure it out.
Because I think that we take a lot for granted. I think there's the perception that motherhood is a wonderful thing and you're going to have a baby.
It is a wonderful thing.
It is a wonderful thing. And you're going to feel, you're going to be floating on air. You have this baby and, it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
And it is wonderful. But it calls
hard.
for a tremendous amount of adjustment also.
Yeah.
And nobody tells you that.
Yeah.
Nobody. I mean, I didn't even know that postpartum depression existed.
It was a thing.
Until I realized, it's a thing. It's not. It's actually a thing.
Absolutely.
Why am I feeling down? I should be happy. So, people need to be, young mothers need to know you're not going to feel good all the time. You're going to be tired. You're going to need a lot of support. If you have support, get it. You need support. Put support in place. Do you have an aunt, a sister, a mother, a godmother? Do you have somebody who can maybe come and stay with you?
Yeah.
They need that nurturing around them. Because I think a lot of because of our, we don't live in a village context
Not
anymore.
anymore. Yeah.
So you have, this nuclear existence, this person and their partner, and the partner is working as well, and so on and so on. Um, and people think, well, I have to, or I can't do it alone, and then it becomes extremely stressful.
Yeah.
So things like that, you need the support.
I get from what I picked from what you're saying is that if we want to improve things as relates to breastfeeding in this country, we have to basically wrap our arms around the mums, give them the information that they'll need. In my opinion, antenatally, so even before they've had baby, oh my
Yes.
gosh, if you were a mother, when you have that baby, you ain't listening to nothing, everything going through one ear and out the next. So antenatally, and then have the support from mums in all the various ways. So as it
And
relates
all
to,
kinds of, and there are things that we don't talk about.
yeah,
What is it to have a C-section
mm-hmm,
and have a young baby? A lot of
yeah,
women have C-sections. You're dealing with abdominal surgery,
yeah.
and you're dealing with a
And
young
how do you
baby
deal
at the
with
same
that?
time.
Yeah,
You may be dealing with a painful episiotomy cut
yeah,
and a baby.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it makes you miserable.
yeah. So having
So
those
we
discussions,
need to
yeah.
have these discussions about the reality of birth.
You've given me some really good some really good tips in terms of what the BCNF might need to do next. Thank you very much, Claire. I know your bill will be in the mail. But I think we got a lot of information here. I like how you carried us back in time, what it was like for mums, like for women in this country, like for families in this country, what they had and what they did not have.
Yes.
And then you took us towards us thinking, oh, things are not so great now, but actually it was far worse back then, and what it was like back then for mums and families, and bringing us back to the present. And then what we can do now, what are the things that we need to pay attention to now that will help push us forward into the next, 100 years and making things better for mothers and children in this country. So I wanted to say thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Oh,
really
so did I. So did I. Really enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll have you back on the show to talk about some of the aspect of
Yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Milk of the Matter. I'm your host, Dr. Alison Bernard. See you next time.